World War One is when the sub came into power and most notably forced America into the war. Submarines have many advantages, being undetectable and traveling underwater, and this made them quite a big scare for above traveling ships. Germans had the biggest sub industry and made the most and had the biggest sub army out of any other country. In 1917, with the Germans up against a wall and almost about to lose the war, they used unrestricted warfare to keep America out of the war. With 7 ships down on the Allied side and American lives lost, Woodrow Wilson entered the war. Thus, submarines were the cause.
The aircraft played an important role for all sides of the Great War. At the beginning of World War I, aircraft was used specifically for observation. However, as technology evolved throughout the war, aerial warfare became an essential part to winning the worldwide battle. As a result, plane technology rapidly advanced during World War I. As the aerial age progressed, the use of horses faded and the aircraft took over. By 1915, the fighter plane was invented to observe the opposing side of the war. The main purpose of the fighter planes at the beginning of the Great War was to relay information to infantry commanders and those manning the artillery. Quickly, fighter planes instead became useful for shooting the enemy, and they would swoop down at rapid speeds to destroy the opposing armies. Fighter planes such as the Sopwith F-1 Camel were designed to carry 4 24-pound bombs, 2 40-pound bombs, or 1 112-pound bomb. These bombs were highly explosive and caused serious damage in any area into which they were released. Along with carrying bombs, aircraft were equipped with other defense mechanisms such as machine guns, grenades, and armor to protect the pilots. Therefore, most of the fighting in the war took place in the air. Soldiers on the ground had limited hope when a fleet of 1,000 armored warplanes equipped with rapid-fire shell and bomb guns swooped down at a 100-mile gait in attack on a body of exposed cavalry or soldiers. The cavalry being attacked would have no other choice than to take cover. As plane technology continued to improve, the demand for planes increased. Manufacturing plants in the United States produced 2,606 planes per month, or 31,248 planes per year. In order to develop the different airplanes and engines, the workforce had high standards in their production processes. Additionally, the fierce mass production of planes continued to the end of the Great War, and the planes were constantly being shipped overseas to be used in battle. In conclusion, the development of plane technology improved tremendously throughout World War I. The need for planes increased, and many improvements were made to enhance aircraft for the future. The number of planes manufactured from the beginning of the war to the end of the war increased drastically. At the beginning of the war, there were about 1,000 planes and 2,000 pilots. Nearing the end, close to 150,000 aircraft had been produced. Planes improved, armies increased, and the aerial age became one of the most important technological advancements in history.
Poison gas was introduced in World War I to get around the many stalemates that the new trench warfare had caused. Germany was the first country to use gas in World War I, but were not the first country to experiment with it. Deaths totaled 98,198 throughout all of the war. Effects included smarting of the eyes, irritation of the nostrils, and so much dryness of the pharynx as to cause pain on swallowing and nausea. Poisonous gas seemed to be an awful thing, and everyone knew it, except the United States. Entering World War I, the United States barely had a program to prepare itself for poisonous gas. Why weren't they prepared? The answer lies in the fact that in World War I, before the US entered, they were getting all of their news from the French and British armies. The French and British knew that in order to win the war, they would need America to join. Knowing this, they blacked out a lot of the bad things about the war. They at first told America that Germany was using a new weapon and that it was a poisonous gas, but did not tell how bad or how many deaths it was causing. They then told America that they had retaliated and were using the gas themselves. After this, they no longer mentioned poisonous gas in any of their reports to the United States. Because they did not mention any of this, the United States failed to create a program until just months before entering the war. In conclusion, trench warfare was the reason for the use of poisonous gas, as it led armies and men into no man's land. Poisonous gas led to 98,198 deaths and many more casualties. Before entering the war, the United States was receiving all of their news from the British and French, and for fear that the US would not join if they knew the true horrors of the war, the British and French did not disclose necessary information involving poisonous gas. Due to this, the United States was underprepared as they entered the war, and they suffered many more casualties than they should have.
By 1915, the war had become a nearly unbreakable stalemate for three major reasons: barbed wire, trenches, and the machine gun. Barbed wire brought both infantry and cavalry to a grinding halt and made them easy targets. Trenches protected defending infantry from enemy fire while allowing them to fight back, and a machine gun could mow down entire units of infantry in seconds. Infantry that tried to push an enemy position would be simultaneously caught by barbed wire, pinned down by machine gun fire, and hammered by artillery until they either retreated or broke and fled. Early solutions to these problems failed because they tended to focus only on one of the obstacles at a time. For example, French forces deployed armored cars to protect their infantry from machine gun fire, but these cars couldn't cross trenches and would still get tangled up in barbed wire. Their wheels would also sink into the wet ground that was prevalent throughout Europe. The solution to these problems arrived at the Liverpool docks on August of 1915, a set of crawler tracks ordered from the Bullock Creeping Tractor Company of Chicago. The initial idea of the tank, a tracked armored trench-crossing vehicle, was first proposed by the Austrian Gunther Burstein in 1911. However, due to the lack of a major war to spark interest in this expensive design, it fell by the wayside. But with Europe in flames in 1915, the British revisited his design. Britain's first completed design, the No. 1 Lincoln machine, reached working order and was placed on its tracks on September 9th of 1915. Designed for tractors, which had a much shorter ground contact than the tank had, these tracks laid flat on the ground, making steering incredibly difficult. The tracks would also sag upon crossing a trench, causing the tank to get stuck in incredibly awkward positions. This design was greatly improved upon over the next month. The chassis of the Lincoln machine was kept, but its tracks were replaced with a much larger lozenge shape that dominated the side profile of the tank. These curved tracks had far less ground contact, allowing the machine to turn far more easily than its predecessor. A large gun turret was mounted in the center of the track on each side. Despite its much heavier weight, the new design performed near flawlessly during its demonstration to officials on January 29, 1916. Following its demonstration, the Army Council placed an order for 100 tanks, a code word that would quickly become the actual name of the vehicle. At the same time, the French were drawing up the initial design for a trench-crossing land battleship. The final design came to be known as the Schneider, and it was approved for production and use despite a number of defects, such as an exposed engine compartment that could cause the crew cabin to reach boiling point. The engine was also prone to being struck by shrapnel, causing fire. The second design of tank, the Saint-Chamond, entered production January 1917. This tank, weighing 23 tons, was almost twice as heavy as the Schneider. It stood on tracks that were designed for a much smaller vehicle and had a ground pressure of almost twice the recommended weight. Initial tank strategy consisted of using tanks to hit enemy hardpoints head-on. British High Command overestimated the durability of these machines, an oversight that would result in the destruction of countless tanks and the deaths of their crews throughout the war. This initial combat revealed a number of flaws in the design of the Mark I. It was reported that the enemy machine gun fire was capable of occasionally breaching the armor and killing and wounding the crew. The glass viewing prisms acted as a funnel for bullets and sprayed shards of glass into the eyes of the driver and gunners. The engine was so loud that the crew members could seldom hear each other, and many crews made improvised silencers for the exhaust ports. The debut of French tanks on the battlefield was even worse than that of the British. The April 1917 Nivelle offensive, doomed from the start by the capture and interrogation of a French commanding officer, resulted in the destruction of 57 tanks by German artillery. Artillery proved to be quite the problem for medium and heavy tanks throughout the war. The new doctrines that focus on mobility, as well as the deployment of the Renault, the first light tank, in May 1918, allowed tanks to run down artillery lines before they could deal sizable damage. The Renault performed exceptionally. The small tank, able to swarm enemies with numbers and cross almost any kind of terrain, could take positions quickly and could operate at peak performance for extended periods of time. The British improved upon their design with the Mark IV in 1917. The Mark IV was especially instrumental in the later parts of the war, participating in nearly every battle where armor was present. The most pronounced example of the Allies' use of tank superiority to win the war was the Battle of Amiens near the end of the war in 1918. 420 Allied tanks pushed the Germans out of their fortifications that they had held since 1915, though only 38 tanks survived the battle. The breaking of the German line at Amiens was the beginning of the end of the war. The Germans surrendered within 100 days. Though they never proved to be what the British hoped they would be, the tank was instrumental in ending World War I.